What would you do if, on your wedding day, every single seat reserved for your family was empty? Let that sink in. Imagine standing there, your hands trembling, your heart pounding, your dress pressed and ready, and all you can hear is the silence of absence. That was me. I walked into the small chapel tucked away in the Texas hill country, the late afternoon sun streaming through stained glass windows that cast red and gold shapes on the floor. I wanted to feel peace. I wanted to feel love. Instead, my eyes fell on rows of chairs, front row, middle row, back row, each one reserved with little cards that read, family. Every one of them was empty. I froze for a second. My throat closed up. For weeks, I had tried to convince myself that my father's words were just anger, that maybe, deep down, he would come around. But his text message had been clear. If you marry him, you marry without us. That was it. No softness, no chance of misunderstanding. Still, a part of me prayed that someone, my mom, a cousin, even my stubborn brother, would walk through those doors. But they didn't. The organ music started, and people turned their heads, expecting a bride followed by her proud father. Instead, it was me, clutching a small bouquet, walking alone. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room where everyone's eyes are asking the same question? Where's her family? That look cuts deeper than any knife. As I walked, I caught whispers. Is her dad not here? Didn't her mom want to see her? Each word tightened around my chest like a vice. I wanted to scream. They chose not to come because they think my husband isn't good enough. But I stayed silent, one foot after the other, my heels echoing like small gunshots on the wooden floor. And then my eyes found Miguel at the altar. He was standing tall, his shoulders squared, his eyes locked on me with a mixture of fear and love. He wasn't a polished man in a tailored suit like the kind my family admired. He was Miguel, calloused hands, sunburned skin, a tie he probably borrowed, and the kindest soul I'd ever known. In that moment, I realized I wasn't walking toward an empty life. I was walking toward him. Still, the sting didn't fade. My father had raised me with speeches about loyalty, about families standing together no matter what. Yet here I was, on the most important day of my life, and he had chosen pride over love. How do you forgive that? How do you even process it? The ceremony went on. The pastor spoke about vows, about union, about the meaning of family. Every word felt like salt on an open wound. Family. That word echoed inside me like a cruel joke. Because my family had decided that wealth and image mattered more than my happiness. But let me tell you something. Absence screams louder than presence. Each empty chair was a slap, a declaration that my love wasn't good enough for them, and yet somehow it also became fuel. Standing there, repeating vows with Miguel, I knew I had chosen love over appearances, truth over lies. I'll never forget the moment we exchanged rings. I slid the band onto his finger, and I swear I could hear my father's voice in my head. He's not worthy of you. The words burned, but at the same time, they ignited something inside me. Because as I looked at Miguel, his eyes wet, his jaw clenched as if he was holding back a storm, I knew my father was wrong. So wrong. Do you know what's strange? Pain and pride can coexist. I was in pain because my family wasn't there, but I was proud because I had the courage to walk down that aisle anyway. That's a detail people don't tell you. Courage doesn't erase the hurt, it just carries it. When the ceremony ended and people clapped politely, I caught sight of those empty rows one more time. The flowers on the pews looked wilted already, as if even they knew no one had come to sit beside them. And in my heart, a voice whispered, "Remember this. Remember what it feels like. because this absence will shape everything that comes next. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this story. Because sometimes the silence of people who should have stood by you is the loudest sound you'll ever hear. And if you've ever felt abandoned, if you've ever walked into a room hoping for support and found only empty chairs, you'll understand exactly how I felt in that moment. After the ceremony, when the last polite claps faded and the guests drifted out into the warm Texas evening, I sat alone with Miguel in the empty chapel. The flowers on the pews were beginning to wilt, and my bouquet lay crooked on the table beside me. You'd think a bride should glow after her vows, right? But I felt hollow, not because I doubted him, but because every empty chair from earlier still sat heavy in my chest. Miguel reached for my hand. His palms were rough, the kind of rough that only years of fieldwork can carve into someone's skin. He squeezed once, silently. He didn't say, "It'll be okay." He didn't say, "Forget them." He just sat there with me, breathing the same air, waiting for me to decide what came next. And that's when the idea hit me. I pulled out my phone, almost without thinking. Miguel frowned a little, like he wanted me to put it away, to stay in the moment. But I shook my head. "Just one picture," I whispered. He looked confused but didn't argue. I had him stand by the stained glass window, where the last light of the day broke into shards of red and gold. He still wore his suit jacket, a little too big for his frame, the cuffs brushing past his wrists. And then, without saying a word, I opened the small wooden box he had tucked under the chair. Inside lay his bronze star medal, resting against the dark velvet like a hidden truth. "Hold it," I told him. He hesitated, almost embarrassed, but then he cradled the box in both hands. The medal caught the light, glowing for a second as though it knew it had waited for this moment. I raised my phone and clicked. One frame. Just him, in that simple suit, medal in his hands, his eyes steady and unashamed. I didn't caption it. I didn't add a single word. I opened the family group chat, the one filled with endless pictures of beach houses, new cars, and business dinners, and I dropped the photo right there, in between their shallow conversations. Then I locked my phone and put it face down on the bench. And let me tell you, silence has weight. Minutes crawled. I could hear the faint buzz of cicadas outside, the creak of wood as the chapel settled in the evening air. Miguel sat beside me, fidgeting with his cuff, probably wondering what exactly I had done. My heart beat louder than the organ had earlier. Because what if they ignored it? What if they deleted it, or worse, what if they laughed? Every vibration of my phone made me jump. The first buzz, I didn't check. The second, I still held back. I wanted them to sit with that image. I wanted them to really look at his face, at the medal, at what it represented. Finally, I picked it up. The chat was lighting up. First, the 3 dots, then silence again. My brother was the first to respond. "Wait, is that Miguel?" Another pause. Then my mother. "I didn't know." And then nothing for a long stretch of minutes that felt like years. Do you know what suspense feels like when it's personal? It's not like waiting for exam results or a job call. It's heavier. It's your own blood deciding whether or not to acknowledge the truth. The next message came from my father. Just 4 words. "Why didn't you tell us?" I laughed bitterly when I read it. "Tell you? When was the last time you asked? When was the last time you even cared to know who he really was?" Then more messages started tumbling in. My sister. "I'm so sorry, Sam." I didn't realize. My mother again. "He served?" He never mentioned. And then, "Can we talk?" It was strange. All the anger I had carried into that chapel suddenly shifted into something sharper. Not relief, not forgiveness, but clarity. They weren't just absent from my wedding. They had been absent from my life, from my story, from Miguel's story. Miguel leaned over my shoulder, reading the words with me. His face didn't change. No smile, no frown, just that calm acceptance he always carried. "You don't have to answer," he said softly. And he was right. I didn't. I locked the phone again and placed it down. The chapel felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of the silence had been broken. They had seen him now, not the farmer, not the outsider, but the soldier, the man who had risked everything long before he met me. And that picture, that one frame with no caption, it said more than I ever could. So let me ask you, have you ever wanted to send a message without words? Just one photo, one gesture, one look that changes everything? Sometimes silence is the loudest language we have. 2 days after the wedding, Austin woke up bright and loud. The kind of morning where the sky feels so blue it almost rings in your ears. Downtown was already closing streets for the Veterans Day parade. Flags bloomed from balconies. Food trucks hissed like kettles. A brass band warmed up somewhere behind the courthouse, the trumpets sharp as sunlight. Miguel didn't want to go. He never does when the attention points at him. He tugged at the collar of his clean shirt, the same one he wears to church, and said, "It's for people who did more." "You did more," I said. "And even if you don't believe that, the day isn't just about you." "It's about all of you," he sighed. He always gives in to reason if I look him in the eyes long enough. We parked a few blocks away and walked in with the crowd. Kids ran with tiny paper flags. A woman in a denim jacket passed out bottle cap poppies she'd pinned with safety pins. Somewhere, a color guard practiced their turns. The air smelled like barbecue and pavement heating under the sun. We found a spot near the old oak by the courthouse steps. I held his hand. You know that feeling when you're steadying someone else and then realize you're steadying yourself? That. My stomach fluttered for no good reason, or maybe for every reason. The mayor's mic crackled. A hush rolled forward in waves, and then names, unit numbers, campaigns we've all heard on the news but never felt under our boots. Each name pulled a thin cord through the crowd, and you could watch faces lift, fall, remember? People clapped. Soft for some, louder for others. The applause never felt careless. It felt like a promise. We know, we see. I scanned the edges and my breath tripped. Behind a cluster of Boy Scouts, 3 familiar silhouettes. My mother's slim, guarded posture, my brother's crossed arms and careful haircut, and my father, square, stiff, as if the air itself had rules. I hadn't invited them. I hadn't told them anything. But there they were, half hidden and somehow still unavoidable. I squeezed Miguel's hand. He followed my gaze. He didn't say a word. His shoulders didn't lift. He just planted his boots. The list of names marched on. A high school choir sang America the Beautiful without accompaniment, and something about the thin, brave voices made my eyes sting. The mayor returned to the mic, paper in hand, voice steady in that ceremonial way officials practice in empty rooms. "And we'd like to recognize a few neighbors whose service often goes quiet," he said. People who came home and kept serving, in different uniforms, on farms, in workshops, in classrooms. I felt Miguel tense. He hates that kind of spotlight, broad, shining, directionless, the kind that finds you even when you step out of it. "Please join me," the mayor continued, "in thanking Sergeant Miguel Alvarez, Bronze Star recipient, and a man this community depends on every single day. For a heartbeat, silence, the kind of silence that draws breath." Then the square erupted. Not polite this time, not the clipped sound people use when they don't want to be rude. This was real. Hands over heads, whistles, boots stomping the concrete like a drumline. I didn't clap, I couldn't. I watched his face. He went pale, and then, somehow, the color came back. He didn't beam, he nodded, like he was acknowledging a truth that was uncomfortable and also, somehow, right. I pushed him forward, and he shook his head like, "Don't you dare!" And I laughed because he forgets what momentum does to human bodies. The applause carried him. We moved through the gap that opened in the crowd. Fingers brushed his sleeve. People I didn't know said, "Thank you," in voices that belonged to private rooms. He reached the steps and took the mayor's hand. There it was, the brief official click of recognition. Then the mayor clapped him on the shoulder, the way one man does when he wants to say more than protocol allows. And from the edge of the steps, my father began to move. You know those moments that slow down without warning? No sound, no air, just a frame burned into your head? That's what happened. My father stepped from behind the Boy Scouts. He squared his spine. He adjusted his cuff like he always does before a presentation. Then he extended his hand toward my husband. It should have felt like an olive branch. It didn't. It felt like a test, like a spotlight turned away from guilt and toward performance. Make me look generous. Make me look redeemed, Miguel saw him. He lifted his chin, not defiant, just awake. He let a beat pass, then another. The crowd softened. The applause thinned to a puzzled murmur. The mayor's smile froze in place. Miguel reached out, not to clasp, but to acknowledge. A polite nod, a measured half gesture that said, "I see you, sir." And then he drew his hand back to his side. Not dramatic, not cruel, just honest. A soundless thud hit the square. My father's jaw tightened. The Boy Scout shifted. Somebody cleared a throat too loudly. The choir director whispered, 2, 3, and the children launched into the Battle Hymn of the Republic, mercifully pulling attention elsewhere. Was it petty? Was it harsh? Ask yourself, what would you do if the hand that refused your vows tried to collect your applause? If the mouth that said not worthy asked to be seen in a better light, under your light? The song swelled. Miguel stepped down and came back to me. He didn't look smug. He didn't look wounded. He looked relieved. A decision had landed. A boundary had been drawn in a public square with no need for speech. We stayed through the rest, through the speeches that were too long, through the reading of names that were too short. A woman next to me cried into her paper poppy, and I gave her a napkin from my purse. We smiled at each other like neighbors, even though we'd never met. When the ceremony ended, people mingled the way people do when they want to go home but aren't ready to stop being together yet. The barbecue line snaked past the courthouse fountain. A little boy saluted every uniform he saw, then saluted a man in a UPS shirt just in case. My father approached again, slower this time. He looked older than he had 2 days ago, and that startled me. He stopped at a respectful distance, as if he were standing on the edge of a yard he didn't own. "Samantha," he said. The word cracked. Miguel stepped a half-inch closer to me. I felt the brush of his sleeve. My father turned to him. "Sergeant Alvarez," a tiny tremor. "Thank you for your service." Miguel nodded once. "Enjoy the afternoon, sir." Polite, frictionless, final. My mother hovered, eyes wet and fixed on some middle distance where things don't have edges. My brother said nothing. His silence held the weight of a closing book. We didn't invite conversation. We weren't cruel about it. We just didn't build the bridge for them. Not yet. Not here. We crossed the square to the shade of the old oak. Miguel took the bottle cap poppy from his pocket and turned it in his fingers like a coin. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And I meant it. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but its shape had changed. It wasn't an open wound. It was a scar, new, sensitive, honest. Do you know what satisfaction sounds like when it's quiet? It's the click of a boundary finding its place. It's the exhale you didn't realize you'd been holding since childhood. We walked toward the truck. People kept stopping Miguel. "My uncle served," a man told him. gripping his arm like a lifeline. "He'd be proud of you." A teenager in ROTC asked, "Was it scary?" Miguel answered without embellishment, "Yes." The kid nodded like he'd been told a secret. Before we turned the corner, I looked back. My father stood where we'd left him, hand falling slowly to his side, the crowd moving around him like a river around a rock. For the first time I could remember, he wasn't controlling the room. The room was telling him something, and if you're wondering whether I felt cruel, I'll tell you the truth. I felt clear. Public honor isn't a family coupon. Respect isn't transferable by handshake. It has to be earned, and not by proximity to someone else's courage. We drove out of downtown with the windows cracked just enough to let in the last of the brass band's echo. Miguel put his hand on my knee at a red light. A small, ordinary touch. It felt like a cathedral. If you've ever needed an entire room to say what one person refused to hear, you know the power of that day. And if you've ever stood between the life you chose and the family that wanted a different story, tell me, what would justice look like to you? A speech? A handshake? Or simply the courage to hold your line, even when the crowd is watching? 3 mornings after the parade, the world snapped in half. No warning, no slow fade. 1 minute I was rinsing coffee grounds from the sink, sunlight cutting clean through the kitchen window. The next, my phone lit up with my brother's name and a sentence that didn't fit inside my chest. "Dad's in the hospital." I didn't ask which one. You don't ask questions when a lifetime of answers is suddenly useless. We drove fast. Miguel kept a hand on the wheel and another steady on the console, close enough for me to feel but not touch, like a lighthouse you can't reach yet. The hospital looked like all hospitals, beige, humming, indifferent. The elevator stuttered up, then opened onto a floor that smelled like lemon cleaner and endings. He was already gone. People tell you a room gets quieter after death. That's not true. It gets louder in a strange way. The beeps still keep time, the vents still whisper. But the person who used to sort those sounds for you, even by being difficult, isn't there to sort them anymore. My mother held a tissue that wasn't helping. My brother stood by the window, staring at a skyline that refused to rearrange itself. I don't remember who told me what. I only remember the shape of the doctor's mouth and how the words hit the air and fell to the linoleum. My father's ring lay in a plastic cup on the bedside table, next to a folded note with his room number. Funny, how a life that loved control ends up labeled with a number and a cup. I didn't cry, not then. Grief is a stubborn thing. It doesn't like being scheduled. Miguel tugged me gently into the hallway. "Breathe," he said, 2 syllables. A command that sounded like a kindness. I did. The air burned going in and coming out. There are logistics after death. Someone has to sign. Someone has to call. My brother moved like a man who had rehearsed for this, which he probably had in his head for years. My mother folded into a chair and pressed her hand flat against her chest, as if something inside her needed pinning. I stood between them, a bridge nobody wanted to cross. We buried him without speeches. He had plenty of those in life. The minister kept it short, the way he used to keep homilies short when my father was in the front pew watching the clock. A warm wind lifted the edges of the tent and rattled the nameplates in the ground. People said things like, he was formidable, and he built something, and he loved in his way, in his way. That phrase can do a lot of damage if you let it. Then came the call from the lawyer. "We should read the will," he said in a voice trimmed of all adjectives. "Sooner rather than later, of course." My father would have appreciated the calendar discipline. Miguel didn't want to come. "It's your family's business," he said. "It's our life," I said, and he came. The office sat on the 12th floor, glass and leather, and a view that made the city look manageable. The receptionist spoke my father's name like a password. The conference room was staged the way conference rooms are staged for men like him. Oak table you could land a plane on. Chairs that encouraged perfect posture. A box of tissues positioned like an afterthought. The lawyer arrived with a slim folder and no small talk. He didn't ask how we were. I respected that in a cold way. He invited us to sit, and we did. My mother with her hands folded like a schoolgirl, my brother straight-backed and ready, me with my palms pressed flat on the table so I wouldn't reach for Miguel's knee in front of everyone. Miguel sat beside me, quiet as a stone you'd build a wall around. "I'll read the document as executed," the lawyer said, glancing at me in that professional way that never actually lands on a person. His voice turned to metronome, clauses, bequests, language sanded down to avoid interpretation. The man who taught me that words could be weapons had also learned how to blunt them until they cut by boredom. And then we reached the part with my name. "Regarding my daughter, Samantha," he read, and I felt everyone lean forward, even the air. "I make no provision." Silence, hard, shiny, complete. My brain tried to bargain with the sentence. Maybe there was a footnote. Maybe there was a trust I didn't understand. Maybe no provision meant something in this room that it didn't mean out on the street. The lawyer kept going, the voice steady, the vowels behaving. "Her choices have separated her from the interests of this estate." My brother coughed, a small satisfied sound he probably didn't plan. My mother said my name, just my name, and then bit her lip like she could unsay the entire paragraph with her teeth. I looked at Miguel. He didn't flinch. He didn't look outraged on my behalf, which I might have mistaken for love. He looked present. He looked like a man who had walked through worse statements and still made it to breakfast the next day. I took a breath that hurt, then another that hurt less. The lawyer wasn't done. Paper slid, a soft scrape. "There are further instructions," he said, "for designated charitable disbursements and for the company." He spoke to my brother now, using the cadence of men transferring weight from one shoulder to another. My brother asked 2 smart questions. He had always been good at questions that sounded like answers. And then, because every room has a trapdoor if you wait long enough, the lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "One more item," he said. "A private instrument executed after the primary will. It pertains to a discretionary fund." "What kind of fund?" my brother asked, too quickly. "A small one, relative to the estate," the lawyer said, which meant it was not small. "Created for the purpose of recognizing character." The words sat on the table like a hot plate no one wanted to touch. "And the beneficiary?" my mother asked, her voice a thread you could snap by mistake. The lawyer looked at me, then at Miguel, then back to the paper. "Sergeant Miguel Alvarez," he read, "to be used at his sole discretion." The room went colder. Even the glass felt like it was listening harder. My brother made a sound between a laugh and a scoff. "You've got to be kidding." I felt the force of my father's last choice hit me in 2 directions at once. Cut off, chosen, disowned, affirmed. I wanted to speak and couldn't. I wanted to leave and couldn't. I wanted to rewind the tape to the parade steps and grab his hand and make him say the words he never said. Miguel didn't move. He didn't look down at the table, didn't look at me, didn't look at my brother. He looked straight ahead, as if he'd heard his name called in a formation and knew better than to fidget. "Why?" my brother asked, louder now, like volume could bully paper. "Why would he do that?" The lawyer lifted one shoulder in a legal shrug. "There's a note on file indicating that, Mr. Whitmore," he still couldn't say my father's first name, "made the change after an event in the community." He did not elaborate. The parade, the hand, the nod. A public square with more truth in it than our dining room ever held. My father had said nothing, and then he had said this, in ink. My mother reached for me. I let her take my fingers. Her palm felt small and bird-boned, the way it used to feel when I was sick, and she'd rest her hand on my forehead to check for fever. "Sam," she whispered. No apology, no defense. Just my name, finally used like a bridge. I swallowed. The lawyer waited. That's one skill you pay for, a man who can hold silence without losing his place. I spoke carefully, each word placed like a stone. Please record that I understand the contents, I said, and that I am not contesting. The lawyer nodded, pen already poised. My brother barked out a laugh. Of course you're not. You've got your hero's allowance. Miguel turned then, not to the lawyer, not to me, but to my brother. His voice was soft enough to be mistaken for a courtesy. This isn't a scoreboard, he said, and I'm not a point you can win. The lawyer slid the acknowledgement page across the table. My hand didn't shake when I signed. Grief had steadied me in a strange way. Anger had given me balance. I passed the pen to Miguel. He didn't touch it. Not yet. On the elevator down, I watched our reflections break into long, silver lines. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue she'd finally put to work. My brother stabbed at his phone with his thumb like he could text his way back into a different outcome. Miguel stood a half step behind me, close enough to anchor, far enough to let me stand on my own. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed against the glass towers and slid down into the street. The city carried on. Lunch breaks. Meter maids, a bus that sighed like an old dog. Grief doesn't pause anything but you. I turned to Miguel. Are you okay? I asked. It sounded like the wrong question the second I said it, but there it was. He met my eyes. Are you? No, yes, neither, both. I will be, I said. And for the first time that day, it felt true. Maybe you've been there. Caught between what you were denied and what you were given, between an old loyalty and a new truth. If your father's last words to you were written instead of spoken, and they cut and healed at the same time, what would you do with that? Would you cash the gesture? Would you reject it on principle? Or would you stand still long enough to hear what your own heart is saying under the paperwork? We didn't go home after the will reading. We drove nowhere for a while, the way people do when the ground under them has shifted and the only thing that helps is motion. I watched the skyline recede in the side mirror until the glass held only sky. Miguel kept both hands on the wheel, quiet in that way he has when he's letting me lead without saying it out loud. When we finally stopped, it was at a diner that smelled like coffee and bacon and middle of the afternoon. The waitress called me Han and slid 2 waters onto the table with an ease that almost hurt. The world was still spinning. That felt rude. I wrapped my palms around the sweating glass and tried to name what I was feeling, cut off, chosen, seen, punished. There isn't a word for all of that at once. Miguel waited. He can sit inside silence like it's a porch swing. I can't. He left it to you, I said. The sentence tasted like a dare and a bruise. Miguel didn't look impressed. He didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful, the way he does when he's measuring lumber. He left a note, he said, more to himself than to me. That means he thought about it. I nodded, because the note mattered. The note meant it wasn't an impulse, not a petty jab, not a last-minute way to stage a win. He had watched the ceremony. He had seen the hand, the nod, the refusal. He had chosen ink over apology. The phone buzzed. The lawyer again. There's an addendum, he said, almost apologetic. A sealed letter. Mr. Whitmore instructed it be opened only if requested by a family member. Requested? I repeated. By which one? Any of you, he said, but only one. And then it's preserved, not shared, a sealed letter, a last voice, rationed. Who designs grief like that? My father, obviously, a man who could turn even regret into a process. We paid and drove back. The office felt colder than before. The receptionist's smile had been refitted to sympathy mode. The lawyer escorted us to a smaller room. A room for private weather, I decided. He set the envelope on the table like it could explode. My name wasn't on it. Neither was my brother's. It simply read, "To be opened upon merit, I hated that line. I loved it. It sounded like him. It sounded like judgment wearing a softer tie. "Do you want to read it?" the lawyer asked, eyes on me. I looked at Miguel. He lifted a shoulder. "Only if you want to," he said. That was the thing. I did and I didn't. I needed to hear the voice that never learned sorry. I needed to protect myself from it, too. I took the envelope. My hands didn't shake. I slid a finger under the flap and freed the paper from its quiet. The letter was short. My father never wasted words when he meant them. If this is opened, it means I miscalculated earlier. I almost laughed. The first sentence was an apology dressed in math. I saw a square full of people tell a truth I failed to see. I saw a man refuse to let me correct the optics without correcting the harm. I do not know how to do the second part. This is a poor substitute. My throat tightened. He had been there. He had watched me watch him. The fund is not about money. You know that, Samantha. It is a way to repair something I damaged in you, your faith that I can recognize worth outside the ledger. I am trying to say, I recognize it now, not in you alone, in him. If he uses it, I hope it is for the work that already gives him dignity. If he refuses it, I understand. People with dignity don't need mine to keep it. He signed only his first name, Richard, not dad, not father, not even his full legal stamp. Just the man, plain, without the suit. I read it twice. Then I handed it to Miguel. He read it once. His mouth didn't move. When he finished, he placed the paper back into the envelope the way you lay a child down when you don't want to wake them. "Merritt," he said quietly. He finally used that word right. We left the office by a back stairwell that smelled like dust and old air. Outside, the Texas light hit everything equally. The parked cars, the bus bench, the crack in the sidewalk where a weed had decided to grow anyway. My brother texted. "So?" I put the phone face down in my bag. At home, I stood at the sink and stared at my hands until they blurred. I'd been preparing for battle for so long, defending Miguel, defending myself, that I didn't know how to stand down. The letter stole my target. It didn't heal the wound. It didn't even close it. It just told the truth, finally, in a voice that couldn't interrupt me anymore. Miguel came in from the porch carrying the mail and a handful of sun. "There's something else," he said, holding up a padded envelope with my father's script across the front, for the files, documents. Of course he had more. We opened it at the kitchen table, where we paid bills and sorted seed catalogs and argued about nothing important. Inside, clipped to a typed receipt from the lawyer's office, was a photo. Me in uniform, hand raised in salute, years ago, and behind it, another photo. Miguel in his National Guard gear, dirt on his face, a grin that didn't apologize for hope. On the back, my father had written 3 words in pencil. I was wrong. If the letter had been a theory, the photos were proof. He had kept them. He had carried our faces in a folder labeled with the cool language of management, for the files, because maybe that's the only way he knew how to carry anything that scared him. I sat down hard. The chair scraped. Miguel slid into the seat across from me. We looked at the evidence of a man learning too late. It changes nothing, I wanted to say. It changes everything, I wanted to admit. 2 ideas pulling on the same rope. "What are you thinking?" Miguel asked. "That the fund isn't the twist," I said. "The twist is that he finally saw you, not as a prop, not as a lesson to me, as a man." Miguel tapped the envelope with his index finger. "And he saw you," he said. "He saw you choosing what he wouldn't." We didn't rush to decide. You can break something by moving too fast around it. We made dinner. We ate quietly. We cleaned the kitchen like a ritual, the way you do when the world is too big and you need a task that ends. Then we sat back down and put the letter between us like a third person we were willing to listen to. "This is a gift," I said finally, "and a test." Miguel smiled without humor. "Sounds like your father." "It does," I said. It also sounds like a door. Not into his approval, into our next choice. Miguel looked out the window where the last light scattered itself across the pasture like coins. If I used it, he said, and I heard the if land with care, I'd fix the irrigation lines and buy the better seed and hire Miguelito for the summer so he can save for school. And if you didn't? I asked. He turned back to me. If I didn't, I'd still do those things slower, harder. With more duct tape, he said, and a corner of his mouth lifted. Money shouldn't change the work. It should change the worry. We fell into a silence that wasn't empty. It was a field lying fallow, gathering what it needed to grow next season. In the quiet, I felt anger drain and something stranger take its place. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition of my father's limits, of his reach, of mine. I picked up the photos again. I thought of the parade, the crowd, the hymn, the hand that didn't meet another hand. I thought of the will, the sentence that cut and the clause that mended. I thought of the letter, the most he could give, which still wasn't what I wanted. Here's the second twist, I said softly. It isn't about him anymore. Miguel nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say it. It's about what we do next. We took the envelope back to the lawyer the next morning. We asked for the official language around the fund, the way you ask a pharmacist to read a label twice. We learned how it could be used and how it could not. My father had written guardrails like he always did. Education, infrastructure, community. Words that dressed money in purpose. The paperwork even contained a clause for transparency. He wanted accountability from the grave. That made me smile and ache at the same time. When we left, the sun was higher. The world looked almost ordinary again. On the sidewalk, a kid in a Little League jersey was practicing pitches against a brick wall. He missed and then didn't. The clean sound of the ball hitting its square made both Miguel and me flinch and then laugh, like our bones remembered joy. I don't know what you'd do in our place. Maybe you'd accept, call it reconciliation by proxy, and sleep easier. Maybe you'd refuse on principle, guard your boundary like a saint guards relics. Maybe, like us, you'd stand in the door for a minute and breathe, and then step into whatever light you've got. If a gift arrives late and imperfect but honest, does it still count? If repair doesn't sound like I'm sorry, can it still be repair? You tell me. Because this is where the story tilts. This is where money stops being the headline and becomes a mirror. What you see in it depends on what you bring to it. And if you've ever had to choose between the satisfaction of a clean break and the harder grace of a complicated truth, well, you already know the weight of this envelope. We set the appointment for noon, not morning. Too raw, not late afternoon. Too much time to rehearse. Noon, when the sun tells the truth and the air doesn't feel like it owes you comfort. Miguel ironed his one good shirt again, the way he does when he's calming himself by straightening what can be straightened. I stood at the sink and watched water slide over my hands like it had somewhere else to be. Ready? He asked. No, I said. But yes. The elevator hummed like an old hymn. 12th floor, same view. Same receptionist who knew how to angle sympathy without drowning you in it. The lawyer met us with that exact neutral tone lawyers practice in mirrors. Miss Whitmore, Sergeant Alvarez. He led us into the conference room, the big one this time, as if decisions need square footage. My mother was already there. My brother too. I hadn't invited them. I also hadn't told them not to come. That's the problem with family. The door is both yours and everyone else's. My mother's eyes darted from me to Miguel to the folder on the table like she was trying to solve a math problem with feelings. My brother leaned back in his chair, hands laced behind his head, a posture that said, outcome pending. Confidence continues. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're here to finalize the question of the discretionary fund. He said fund like it was a rare bird that might spook. Before we proceed, I want to confirm you've each reviewed the terms. We have, I said. Miguel nodded. And your decision? The pen waited above the paper, a small expectant spear. Miguel didn't rush. He never does. He placed both palms on the oak, as if checking whether it could hold him. He looked at my mother first, then at my brother, then at me. Last, at the lawyer. Because that's the order of things when you're answering a question bigger than contracts. I'm declining, he said, calm, clear, no flourish. The room blinked. Even the HVAC seemed to forget its job for 1 second. My brother scoffed a sound shaped like a laugh. You're what? Declining, Miguel repeated. Respectfully. Why? My brother's voice jumped a register. It's money, it's security, it's not mine, Miguel said. Not like that. He turned to the lawyer, because a man deserves the courtesy of the formal sentence. Please note that I decline the fund. I won't accept distributions now or later. I understand I have the right. I'm choosing not to exercise it. The pen stopped hovering and began to move, the way a bird finally commits to flight. Scritch, scritch. Ink made the decision real. My mother's hand flew to her mouth and stayed there, like she had to hold in all the words the years had stored. Miguel, she whispered, my father's name nowhere in the sentence and somehow everywhere. Are you sure? He gave her the kindest truth. I'm sure. I could feel my heart trying to find a beat that matched the room. It couldn't. I looked at him, at the lines the sun had written along his cheeks, at the small scar near his jaw where a boyhood fence had argued with him, at the steadiness that made me say yes in a chapel full of absence. He didn't look heroic. He looked like himself, which is rarer and braver. My brother leaned forward, elbows on the table, salesman voice loaded. Let me get this straight. You refuse the fund, and somehow that makes you... What? Noble? Is this a stunt? Miguel tilted his head, almost curious. Do you need it to be a stunt to understand it? My brother stared, silence stretched. The tight kind, the kind that creaks when you move. Somewhere, a siren wailed 12 floors below, thin as string. Miguel spoke again, slower now, because the most important sentences do not like to be rushed. Your father, my father-in-law, wrote a letter. He tried to repair something he broke. Money can do a lot. It can't do that work for him. He turned finally to me. Or for us. The lawyer slid a form across the table. Initial here, date there. Miguel took the pen. The click of it landing in his hand sounded like a door latch. He wrote his name without hesitation. I watched each letter appear as if someone were stitching a cut closed from the inside out. And then, this is the part I didn't expect. He looked at me and said, I want to put it on record. The lawyer glanced up. Record what? Miguel didn't look away from me. What I'm saying no to and what I'm saying yes to. He breathed in, breathed out, and the room seemed to measure its oxygen against his. I'm saying no to buying peace with cash. I'm saying no to the idea that worth transfers by will. I'm saying no to shortcuts through grief. He paused, and you could hear the air lean in. I'm saying yes to the long way, to work, to neighbors, to whatever we build with our hands and our time, and I'm saying yes to her. He nodded toward me like a vow, to showing up. The lawyer's pen hovered again, then began to catch up. He didn't have a field for that, but he tried. My brother rolled his eyes so hard I could hear it. So we're doing theater now. I turned to him. No, I said softly. We're doing adulthood. He sat back, chastened not by shame, but by the presence of something he couldn't price. That, more than anything, is what rattled him. We grew up with numbers pinned to everything. Square footage, net worth, year-end bonuses. Miguel had just introduced a currency my brother didn't trade in. My mother reached across the table. Her fingers touched mine and then, carefully, Miguel's sleeve. "For what it's worth," she said, "this feels right." The words came out like a confession found under a stack of ledgers. Miguel nodded, gracious in victory, even though he didn't think of it that way. He looked back at the lawyer. "You can include a statement if you need," he said. "Here's mine, and you can quote me. Value doesn't come from money, but from presence. That's the rule I live by. Put that in your file, pattern interrupt." The room went quiet in a new way, not stunned, stilled. The kind of quiet that respects the sentence it just heard. I felt tears hit without the usual warning, not the messy kind, the surprised kind. The body saying, "We made it." I wiped them fast because I didn't want them to be the headline. The headline was his voice. The headline was the simple way he set a boundary and called it love. The lawyer slid a final page toward him. "Signature, Sergeant." "Just Miguel," he said, and signed. We stood. Chairs whispered back under the table. The door opened with a soft sigh, like the room was relieved to be done holding so much. In the hall, the carpet swallowed our steps. The receptionist looked up, and I think she knew, the way people know when a decision rearranges a face for the better. In the elevator, my mother pressed the close button like speed could help. She watched the numbers count down and then back up again in her reflection. "Thank you," she told Miguel, surprising herself with the word order. Not for declining, for choosing her. He smiled. I was always going to choose her. On the street, the heat rose off the pavement in visible waves. We walked to the truck without talking. Sometimes the only appropriate soundtrack is the world at work. Horns, footsteps, a laugh ricocheting between buildings. Miguel opened my door. I climbed in. He didn't start the engine right away. He let the silence be its own ceremony. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Always the wrong question and somehow the necessary one. He shook his head. "Ask me what I gained." "All right," I said. "What did you gain?" He looked at me like the answer was obvious and also tender. "A cleaner heart, a quieter house, a wife who won't wonder if I took the easy road." I laughed through the last of the tears. "I wouldn't have wondered." "You would have forgiven," he said. "Different thing. We drove. Past the courthouse that still held our names. Past the diner with the stubborn coffee smell. Past the bus stop where a man read a newspaper like it still controlled the day. Somewhere between downtown and the first open field, the knot in my chest loosened its grip. Not gone. Loosened. Enough to breathe in without counting. At a red light, Miguel reached over and took my hand. No big gesture. No camera-ready sweep. Just fingers finding fingers because they know the way. I thought of every time he had shown up. The late-night drives, the muddy boots left by the door so he wouldn't track the pasture through the kitchen, the small notes he tucks into my lunch when he thinks I'm not looking. Value doesn't come from money, but from presence. It wasn't a line, it was an inventory. If you're still with me, let me ask you something. What would you do if a gift arrived that was part apology, part challenge? Would you accept it and call it peace? Would you reject it and call it honor? Or would you, like us, choose the decision that lets you sleep, that lets you look at yourself in the mirror and say, "We showed up for each other when it mattered"? Tell me in the comments what presence looks like in your life, because I think that's the currency we're all really spending. We didn't drive straight home after the office. We took the long road that runs past the feed store and the little taqueria with the hand-painted sign. The sky was the kind of blue that makes you think it will stay forever. It won't. But for a few miles, it fooled us both. Miguel rolled down his window and let the heat in on purpose, like he wanted the air to touch him, to register the day on his skin. When we turned onto our road, the gravel popped under the tires like corn in a skillet. I could smell cut grass from a pasture a mile away. The farmhouse came into view the way homes do when you've chosen them with your whole body, plain, unashamed, standing on good legs. The porch light was off. It was still daylight, but that detail made me happy anyway. It meant we weren't coming back to a vigil. We were coming back to a life. We didn't talk at first. Miguel parked the truck and rested his hands on the wheel like he was finishing a prayer. Then he looked at me and smiled that small, square smile that belongs to men who fix things with their hands. "Hungry?" he asked. "Always," I said, and it was true in more ways than one. Inside, the house held the kind of quiet that doesn't judge you. The dog stretched and thumped his tail twice, the way he does when he thinks maybe, just maybe, there's a walk in his future. I kicked off my shoes by the door. The boards remembered where my feet go and offered them the right creak in return. Miguel set the keys in the dish shaped like the state of Texas. Clink. There's a comfort in small rituals. They say, you have a place. We cooked without choreography, and still it looked rehearsed. He chopped, I stirred, he salted, I tasted. The pan hissed when the tomatoes hit the oil, and the smell rose up like an argument for staying alive. We ate at the kitchen table where the afternoon light always breaks into generous squares. He told me about the irrigation lines that needed replacing. I told him about a new airman on my team who still calls me ma'am, like he's apologizing for his youth. We talked about everything that wasn't the fund, until not talking about it started to feel like we were keeping a guest in the hallway. I placed my fork down. We did the right thing, I said. I was telling him, I was telling me. Miguel wiped his mouth with a folded paper towel, the cheap kind we always buy in bulk. We did the right thing for us, he said. That's the only kind of right that holds. After dinner, we walked the fence line. The sun leaned lower and laid copper across the pasture. Grasshoppers rattled like news on an old radio. The hawk that owns our sky drew a thin line above us with its one wing that bends wrong. We're all marked by what we've survived. Some of us fly prettier for it. At the far corner where the mesquite pushes too close, there's a gate that sticks unless you lift it at just the right angle. Miguel lifted. I slipped through. We stood where the land opens and the neighbor's property begins, and for a second we were just two dots on a big green page. He slid his arm around my shoulders. I leaned in. The horizon didn't move. Maybe it finally trusted us. Do you think he knew we'd say no? I asked, because the question had been pacing in me since noon, Miguel thought. He always gives a question room to show its true shape. I think, he said, he knew we might. And I think he made peace with both answers. I pictured the letter again. The pencil on the back of the photo, I was wrong. 3 words that tried to reposition a mountain. Is it enough? Are 3 words ever enough? I don't know, but they're more than 0. Sometimes that's the only math you can solve. We walked back as the light thinned to honey. On the porch, Miguel sat on the top step and pulled off his boots. A small avalanche of dust fell and settled in the cracks like it had been expected. I sat beside him in socks, feet on the warm wood, knees touching. The first stars arrived like brave scouts. I keep hearing his sentence, I said. Value doesn't come from money, but from presence. That one's mine, Miguel teased, bumping my shoulder with his. It is, I said. But I think he finally heard it. We didn't owe the evening anything, so we didn't try to make it perform. We sat there and let the day sift down to what would last. A barn cat ghosted across the yard with the unhurried confidence of small royalty. A coyote yipped 3 fields over, thin and proud. Somewhere down the road, a truck backfired and a peal of laughter chased it. Life kept happening. It didn't check with us first. That felt right. Later, inside, I took the box from the shelf and set it on the table. The one with our papers, passports, a deed with our joint names on it. The folded program from the parade. I added the letter back in its envelope, and the 2 photos tucked face to face like they were teaching each other something. Not to memorialize the money, to memorialize the truth. I wrote a note and slipped it in. We chose presents. If you're reading this someday, remember, presents pays daily. A message to a future kid. or to my future self, or to anyone who needed the line. Miguel turned off the kitchen light, and the house fell into the soft geography of lamp glow. We went to bed early, not because we were tired, but because rest felt like a declaration. I slept hard and woke before the alarm. The morning was cool, one of those rare Texas mornings that smells briefly like the ocean because the wind has blown in from somewhere kinder. I made coffee and took it outside. From the porch you can see the east field and the first row of pecans we planted the year we met. They aren't tall yet. That's okay. I like living with things that require seasons. The dog flopped at my feet like a rug with opinions. Miguel came out with his mug and leaned on the railing. We didn't say good morning. We were in it. Here's the truth I promised you. Peace is not a permanent address. It's a chore you do daily, like dishes or sweeping. Yesterday we said no to a fund. Today we'll say yes to 3 dozen smaller things, mending the fence, calling my mom back, show up for an ROTC event because a kid asked, and I remember what asking costs. None of it is dramatic. All of it counts. You might be waiting for the big morale. Maybe you want me to say forgiveness bloomed overnight, or that my brother texted something brave, or that the sky wrote my father's name in contrails. I won't. That isn't our ending. Our ending is simpler and, to me, stronger. We are okay. The weight we carried shifted to the right muscles. The story is now pointed forward. Before we started chores, I walked to the fence and put my hands on the wire. Cold metal. Dew that hadn't decided whether to stay. I closed my eyes and remembered the chapel, empty chairs like teeth. I remembered the square, applause like weather. I remembered the conference room, the pen's scratch as a boundary found its words. And then I opened my eyes and looked at the field in front of me. Not a metaphor, a field. Soil and work and what you put in coming back to you in a form you can eat. If you've ever been judged by people who should have loved you first, hear me. You can build a life that doesn't audition for anyone. If you've ever been handed a late apology with a $sign stapled to it, hear me. You get to decide what counts. If you've ever stood at a door between grievance and grace, hear me. You can choose the door that fits your feet. There is no prize for suffering longer than you need to. There is honor in a clean number. There is also honor in a complicated yes. Do the one that lets you sleep. Mid-morning, kids' voices drifted from the road. Neighbors biking past, shouting hello the way people do when they're still surprised the world is holding. Miguel waved. I waved. The dog barked once and then considered the matter resolved. We went back to our list. Fix the squeaky hinge. Check the salt block. Fold the laundry that had decided to wrinkle in the basket just to see if we'd notice. Normal things. Beautiful, necessary, unphotogenic. And one more thing. Because this is YouTube and you're here with me, inside this story, I want to ask you a question. What does presence look like in your life? Today, not someday. Is it a phone call you keep postponing because it's awkward? Is it a ride to a doctor's appointment when you'd rather be anywhere else? Is it taking off your boots at the door so you don't track your bad day across someone else's kitchen floor? Tell me in the comments. Share one small way you plan to show up this week. Not a speech, a step. I'll read them. I'll cheer you on. Maybe we'll build a small, stubborn community right here. People who believe in the kind of value you can't wire transfer. By noon, the sun had climbed high enough to put a shine on the metal gate. I brought out lemonade. Miguel took the glass and drank like a man who respects what cold can do. He set it down and looked at me a second longer than usual. You good? He asked. I am, I said, and smiled in a way that didn't need translation. We stood there a moment, two ordinary people in a wide, imperfect world, holding what we'd chosen and letting the rest go. And if you ever pass by our road and see a porch light on at dusk, know this. It's not a beacon for a fight. It's a welcome. It's a promise. It's the glow of a house where presence lives.